Welcome back once again to the Storytellers podcast. I am your host, Peter Lewis. And here we are once again in my favorite place on the planet, sitting in this tiny little closet in front of a microphone with not much airflow talking to you guys. How are you today? I wish you could answer that, but no, it's just me in this closet by myself. Anyway, welcome back to the Storytellers podcast. So if you've joined us last time, you'll probably remember that we are currently right in the middle of a character building workshop. Being a storytelling podcast, we're going to be hearing stories from all over the place, different references, different people and their experiences, and bringing storytelling to life. And, we had initially met talking about impactful characters. So that was episode 1. We had talked about how a really simple way to have a character is to give them just a really basic timeline. And we had broken it down into 3 steps. Where is this character coming from? What are they currently doing? And where are they going after this? A really simple way to break down a point of impact that a character has. We had used Gimli from Lord of the Rings as an example from the novel In a Moment That He Had. And what we're going to do now is we're going to kind of expand a little further. So we talked about characters, but now let's talk about how to tie in settings with your characters. And of course, this being a storytellers podcast, what better way to kick it off than with a story? The gravel under the tires of our car crunched and rumbled as we pulled into the parking lot. My wife was now about to explode with excitement. This was our first time strawberry picking this season. I gingerly opened my car door and was immediately greeted by a wave of aromas coming from the barn nearby. Fresh cut grass, the sting of manure, and the hint of sweet berries filled my nostrils as I left my vehicle and chirped its locking sound. We grabbed our baskets and walked towards the first row of bushes. They stood as tall and proud as tenured soldiers in their ranks, each one decorated with their honorable rubies along their vines. The fruits were red and speckled with tiny yellow seeds, signaling that the harvest time was now. Trudging through the dirt, we passed down the ranks of these bushes, inspecting very carefully for the perfect ripe and sweet fruits like a Marine scouting a navy blue uniform of another. Small children ran up and down the aisles with excitement, each one with a face stained red with their freshly picked bounty. The sun was just hitting noon, and a salty bead of sweat dropped down the brim of my cap. Oh, it's so beautiful. Oh, every time I hear it, it gets me. Nah, I'm just kidding. I wrote that a few minutes ago. But there you have it. A really simple example of, honestly, a really simple thing brought a little more to life with some basic details about the setting. It would have been really easy just to say, yeah, we went strawberry picking and it was hot and it smelled like poo outside, but the fruit tasted good. Doesn't really do it justice. And so by using just really simple metaphors and similes and personification, you're really able to inject so much into a setting and really give it more life. And there's a reason why we're talking about strawberries in particular today, and we will get to that shortly. But let's start by talking about a setting. So, a setting, by definition, is a context, place, time, or environment where something takes place. Settings can be anything from something big, vast, and expansive like outer space, or it could be something as small as a coffee shop, or even just a bedroom with someone laying and dreaming on a pillow. Settings, some of them are momentarily, and some of them are just these big, expansive things. And why I wanted to highlight settings is because there's so much you can do with a setting that just emphasizes your characters, their growth, the process they're going through, and it just injects so much into it. So when it came to today's episode, I actually had a really hard time landing on a setting to use, but I landed on the Shire from The Lord of the Rings. I could have chosen anything from outer space, the Wild West, and you name it, anywhere's a setting. And what I decided, why I decided the Shire was because while my wife and I were picking strawberries, I remembered this scene from the movie, and it's such a powerful scene because you get to see a character really anchoring back on a powerful setting. So that clip, if you want to go and watch that, that is on my Instagram. My Instagram handle is I am P Lewis, spelled out IAMPLEWIS. So if you want to go check it out, you'll kind of be caught up with everyone. But if not, I will go ahead and read the script from that scene, and then we will talk about why this was my choice for settings today. So in the scene, Sam and Frodo are on this big fiery mountain, and they are so close to the end of their quest. And just when all hope seems lost, they're tired, they're exhausted, they're physically wiped out, they have nothing left. Sam is kind of holding Frodo, and he asks him this question, and he says, "Do you remember the Shire, Mister Frodo? It'll be spring soon, and the orchards will be in blossom, and the birds will be nesting in the hazel thicket, and they'll be sowing the summer barley in the lower fields, and eating the first of the strawberries with cream. Do you remember the taste of strawberries with cream?" So the first thing I'm going to say is I did that scene absolutely zero justice. I would highly recommend renting the movie The Lord of the Rings Return to the King by Peter Jackson and watching that scene for yourself or checking it out on my Instagram again. But here's where we're going to dig into our workshop today, which is building powerful settings that reveal characters and emphasize characters. And so, why I chose that example is I think it's interesting because they actually are talking about two settings in this moment. You have their current setting, which is their surroundings. It's kind of that tired heaviness and exhaustion. But they're actually referencing a different setting, one that is very much a place of rest, a beacon of hope. Kind of the strength that flows through them is drawn from this setting called the Shire. So, after giving it a little bit more thought, I've realized a really simple formula for building a powerful setting is this: powerful settings are anchors that either reveal characters, feed the narrative, or inform the reader. Sometimes settings are just there for us to give us a little more context of what's happening. But then in this case, with our example of the Shire, we see that the Shire in this moment is used to reveal more about the characters and their ties to it. We can see that in the state of exhaustion, there could be a million things you could think about. But Sam chose the Shire because, again, it's that hopeful strength that they draw their energy from. What you'll learn throughout the series of the books and the movies is that the Shire very much does become this kind of utopian feel for the characters. When they think about what's going to happen in the world, they think about what's going to happen to the Shire. And when they're talking about ending their quest, they're like, "Oh, well, can't wait! I can't wait to get back to the Shire." Um, and even when it comes to failures, they say like, maybe we should just go back to the Shire, where we belong. This world is not for us. This is not our battle to fight. And you can see that in so many different ways that this setting of the Shire is used to either just give us a little more context about what's happening, or it kind of feeds the narrative and reveals more and more about these characters we're looking at. So let's get into the practical side now. The workshop, again, we're looking at how to build a setting that can really fuel our characters or fuel our narrative or inform the readers or listeners of our stories. So, what I've done is I've broken this up into three different sections for how to create a setting. And what we'll do is we'll use the Shire as one example, and then we'll use my strawberry story, which is, Newberry Medal worthy, as our other example. So, when it comes to making settings, let's first talk about what I like to call descriptors. Now, these terms I'm going to be using, some of these are, my made up terms for how I like to describe things. So, hopefully, you'll kind of get what I'm hinting at when I talk about these. But the first one is descriptors, things that describe what's happening. The first one, when it comes to settings, use details. Settings are wrapped up in their details, and sometimes you just have to unpack them a little bit. In the scene with Sam and Frodo, you see that Sam, when he's talking about the Shire, he's using the sights and the sounds and the taste, and he even asks him like, "Do you remember the taste of strawberries and cream?" Um, For our strawberry field, we used as soon as I opened the car door, it was the strong scent of manure mixed with all these other scents. And then it came down to, these big, tall, soldier-like bushes standing perfectly in their lines, decorated with all these rubies. And so just by putting in these little details here and there, you can really bring more life to your setting, whether it's, what are you seeing? What are you smelling? Think about the senses, and a practical way to start building a setting is use all five. Choose a setting and just go through, like, all right, taste. What can they taste? Two, sight. Like, what are they seeing? Three, what are they hearing? And just challenge yourself. Challenge yourself to work all five of those into your setting. Another item is the mood, as I like to call it. And the mood is, where is this? What is the social interaction like? What's the time period like? So for the Shire, or I guess the Lord of the Rings example, when they're talking about the Shire, they're talking about the springtime, that beautiful moment when the sun's coming up early in the mornings, and the farmers are out in the fields sowing, and the birds are nesting and getting ready to lay their eggs, and it just brings this huge picture to your head, even though they're on some fiery mountain somewhere. And then for our strawberry field, we had mentioned it was noontime. It was the first harvest of the season, so everyone's really excited, and there are children running around, which would say, okay, so this farm is probably very family friendly, and there's probably kids laughing. There's probably someone crying with a scraped knee. I will say there was a child crying when we were there, and it was definitely noticeable, to say the least. But again, are people interacting? Are they talking? What are the things that are happening in between the people who are experiencing those senses? And now, one of the other descriptors I like to say, is this vital to the plot? Is this something where we are going to be seeing it come back? Is it something where we're going to be really attentive to hint at certain details? What I mean by that is, will this be symbolism? Is this something where, for the Shire, they talk about like the rolling hills and the beautiful food and all of that? Is it something where they just kind of show up once and it's like, cool, yeah, that was a good time. Like the food was great and the nature was beautiful. Or is it something that's going to come back later where, in the midst of this hardship that Sam is experiencing, he remembers strawberries and cream, and it helped feed his inner strength to keep going because he remembered the joys of the Shire. And then for our strawberry story, it could be vital to the plot. It could be something where maybe at the end of the story, when my wife and I get home and we make our muffins, we sit and have coffee and watch the sunset, and we're just taken back to those big, tall bushes that we saw. Maybe it's something that will be a conversation point in the story, or it's something that might just disappear. And so, in my sense, my strawberry field, it doesn't really drive the plot of the full story, and that's okay. You can have some settings that kind of feed the narrative and will come back and circle around later. And sometimes it's just a one-time visit and you might never bring it up again. All that to say, when it comes to using descriptors, it's really easy just to consider, the basic five senses, how people are interacting there, and is it something that you want to kind of drop little hints here and there that they're going to have returning memories of it, or is it just a passing thing that once they're done, there's not going to be a reference of it again? Alrighty. So now let's kind of shift gears a little bit and let's go into what I like to call the abstract elements. So abstract are now it's the things that are a little less clear to describe, whether it would be emotion or again that character revealing thing. For emotion, there are so many things you can do with that. I mean, it could be, for example, of the Shire. In that scene, Sam and Frodo are in tears because they're just remembering these beautiful things. And so what we see is that, the Shire brings up just the surge of emotions. For the strawberry field, it was pulling into the parking lot. We made it like this place of excitement where it's like, yes, it's the first harvest. Like there's excitement, there's buzzing in the air. There's all kinds of feelings around it. For my side of the story, it was very much like just being impressed with the farm and its layout and its structure and how busy it was. And then for my wife, it was just like, I am so excited to be there. And so even in this same setting, both of the characters can experience the setting with a different emotion. For me, it was like, hey, cool, farm. For my wife, it's like pinnacle of excitement for the day. And so you can actually even take your characters and say, okay, well, this character is going to be happy about it. And this one's going to reminisce and maybe have a tear that they're going to shed. All kinds of different things. What's cool too is when we're thinking about the more abstract things of, how is this person emotionally feeling in this situation? This is also where you can get really creative and use your setting to reveal things about your character. And so this could be something where maybe as we're walking along, my character in the story of strawberries, maybe I didn't say anything right away, but then I look and say, "Oh wow, this is this breed of strawberry. These kind are great for baking in pies." And so what you see is just by me kind of going about and once I see a strawberry, it's now a time to reveal something about my character. So it's like, oh, so he might be quiet, but actually he's very smart and he's very educated on the topic of strawberries. For Sam, a lot of the references he was using in the moment of talking about the Shire, they were farming related. So it reveals more of, he's proven himself to be this great fighter and this close friend, but where he really starts to become more expressed is in gardening. And he is a gardener by trade. That's what he does. And so whenever he thinks about it, it's not, oh, it's this the roaring fires and the drinks and the parties. For him, it's, that the morning crisp air. It's sowing seeds in the field. And it reveals that he's actually this very tender gardener who just loves the land that he lives in. Alrighty. So thus far, we've covered the scripters, which are the basic, easiest things to recognize: senses, interactions, the social climate. We've looked at abstracts, which are typically things that require a little more interaction, or sometimes it requires a character. The emotion is only shown through the characters who are in the setting. The setting just doesn't emanate this emotion. And now we're going to get into what I like to call the principles. And these are principles that I use. These aren't necessarily spoken rules that everyone should follow, but there are things that I have learned by reading many stories that really help. And the first one I like to talk about is take your time to reveal your setting. In poker terms, you could say, don't show your hand too soon. And this is something I actually learned from reading the Harry Potter books by J.K. Rowling. You think in book one, you learned everything about Hogwarts, and literally, which is the school for those of you who have not read it. And what you see across these many, many books is they just reveal more and more and more and more and more about this setting. And the same thing, with Lord of the Rings, it's, we might only see a piece of the Shire in the peaceful time. We've not seen it in a hard time. Maybe we'll talk about the Shire when it's in winter. And so it's a little tempting at first to say there's a door and through that door there's a green clock and the green clock is ticking and it's got 12 numbers on it, and to kind of just overdo it. You don't want to blow all the readers up or your listeners up ahead of time with these just incredibly long-winded detail trains. But take your time, put yourself in their character's shoes, and maybe it's a for the strawberry field. For me, I broke it down and said, okay, so what's the first thing? I smell poo in the air and it doesn't smell great. So that's my first interaction with it. But then as I got out and started exploring, I began to realize, like, wow, there's actually a lot here. There are these beautifully just manicured plants and these big bright red fruits on them. And so it's something where I kind of used a person going through the setting to reveal it instead of saying, here's everything the setting has to offer. Look, here's character Bob. Let's see what Bob does in the setting. And it puts it back into that kind of first person perspective of experiencing the setting. And now, this last principle I want to cover is actually one of my favorite things that I think I ever learned when it came to storytelling. I've heard this through friends of mine who've written books. I've also heard it through famous authors, but there is something called the power of naming. When you name something, it gives more power to it. And so I actually, one place I've seen this expressed really well is in the Dune series by Frank Herbert. Everything has a name. So instead of saying, oh, the people are happy, maybe there is a term for that type of happiness. Maybe when it's springtime and all the farmers are in the field, like Sam's talking about in the Shire, maybe there's a name for that. Maybe they refer to it as spring bliss, like, oh, happy spring bliss. And, it gives more power to it. And so then later they go on to reminisce about something else. Or for me, maybe it's as simple as just naming the farm. Maybe it's, Bill's farm. It's like, oh yeah, Bill's farm. Like I love the strawberries at Bill's farm. And then it becomes this thing where you have more of a thing to anchor on. But going back to that more abstract one, maybe it's something where, my wife and we call it like berry day. It's like, well, it's berry day. Like, well, what's berry day? Oh, well, berry day is the first day of the season when we go picking. And so we're going to go celebrate berry day. And you can just keep creating more and more things with this setting. Maybe berry day is a holiday, or again, maybe it's an emotion that people feel. And you can really take one of those pieces we've talked about, whether it's a descriptor or an abstract, and then even take it further and then name it. And so you don't have to do this all at one time, but again, it's just one of those tools you can use to really expand the rate and the depth that you are creating and revealing your settings. And now go ahead and take a big deep breath and wipe the sweat from your brow, because that was a lot of information. But I hope that after what we've talked about today, you feel more equipped to make your powerful settings for your powerful characters to interact with. So that is all we had for today. One thing I really enjoy about this workshop is it's a time for me to be creative, but it's also a time to maybe help you guys get inspired to write stories of your own. I shared my Instagram handle earlier, and if you ever want to talk about storytelling, or if you got something you'd like to bring to the podcast, and maybe we can do an episode together, let me know, because I love the interaction piece. I don't want this podcast to just be me talking by myself, even though that's typically what a podcast is someone just talking. But I really want to help encourage storytelling and hear some of the best stories out there. So before we leave, let's just remind where we've come from, what we're doing, and where we're going. We came from this kind of workshop of building these big, impactful characters. Today we talked about settings, where we look at what a setting is. Again, it's the context, place, time, or environment where something takes place. And then we kind of change that to say a setting is actually an anchor that reveals characters, feeds the narrative, or just informs the readers. We can do that through using descriptors, kind of those really concrete details, the abstract elements, where we look into emotion and how characters interact with the environment to sometimes reveal more about themselves. And then we just kind of wrapped up with, the principles, taking your time to reveal it. It doesn't have to all be in the first go, that you have to, throw your whole hand out there and show everyone what you have. But yeah, take your time to reveal it. And then lastly, there's just power in naming things, giving something a name that really gives more depth when it comes to storytelling. So thank you so much again for tuning in today to the Storytellers podcast. The next episode we're going to cover is going to be the second to last part of our workshop, where we're going to talk about characters overcoming things. And that'll be them facing certain challenges and kind of helping set some story conflict dynamics, things that they're going to be doing. It's not just characters walking around in a setting, but everyone's got something they're doing. Am I right? In Lord of the Rings, they got to get rid of that ring. And in the strawberry field, I got some muffins to make. Speaking of, I'm pretty sure there's a muffin in the kitchen. I'm going to go grab that. But thank you guys so much for being here today. And I'm really excited to see you in the next episode. Until then, take care. Thank you again for tuning into this episode of the Storytellers podcast. If you'd like more information on when episodes are released, you can subscribe to the podcast or follow me on Instagram at IamPLewis. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.